Good morning once again, everyone. We'll start now. It's already 10 o'clock. So welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Ben. I'm a strategist here at Argentum Consultants, and it's my pleasure to be hosting today's webinar titled Intergovernmental Funding and the Path to Collaboration. Today's webinar will last around 30 minutes. And following the webinar, just before we close, our team will open a poll so you can post questions, which we will be glad to send you follow-ups after the webinar. Now, before we start today's discussion, I'll just give a brief intro about me, then we'll go over today's agenda, and we'll get started discussing intergovernmental or intergov funding. So once again, I'm Ben. I'm a bit hoarse, so excuse me if I have to stop occasionally. I've been with Argentum for 3 years now. I'm an expert strategist. I have a PhD in all things of Middle East studies, and I've been working at Argentum for now again 3 years, and have been exposed to the non-dilutive funding in which intergovernmental funding is a significant or has a significant role. So what we want to do for today's discussion, or just skip quickly to the agenda, is to first go over why intergov funding, what benefits it holds for you, and how you can benefit from joining, what you have to do in order to join the various intergovernmental funding opportunities out there, because there are quite a lot of those around. In doing so, excuse me, we will discuss several upcoming funding intergovernmental opportunities and how you should prioritize which ones are the most relevant for you, your team, and your local and cross-European or even global aspirations. In between that, we'll have a quick look at Argentum's multi-submission strategy and the way I and my fellow strategists work towards promoting, amongst other opportunities, intergovernmental opportunities. And before we close, we'll just go over some upcoming funding opportunities, which we won't have time to discuss separately here, and we'll have a quick summary. So once again, I see several other attendees have joined. Welcome everyone, and wishing us all a very interesting webinar. So to get us started, why should you join intergovernmental funding, or what you can benefit from intergovernmental funding? Now, intergov funding typically offers SMEs, which I suppose are the majority of today's attendees, flexible budgets with grant components of around €500,000 per participant per call, with comfortable funding rates. When we say comfortable, that means that in very few cases, the funding rate will be lower than 50%. And in many cases for SMEs, funding rates in intergov calls will be 60 or even 70% funding rate. So that means that you have a nice budget for a sustainable project that you can do with one partner or more outside of your country within a given time frame of typically 1 to 3 years, and enjoy a good funding rate. Now, unlike Horizon Europe calls, which have separate benefits, which we can discuss in a different webinar, intergovernmental calls are open to all, in most cases, or most in several other cases, R&D sectors. That is what we call bottom-up calls, which don't have a thematic scope, which means effectively that you are free to use intergovernmental funding for your project, to fulfill your R&D goals, to promote your own R&D pipeline with the respective partners you bring on board. In this regard, intergovernmental funding offers you much more flexibility than the top-down or challenge-driven calls, which you can find, say, at or via Horizon Europe calls. Now, another benefit of intergovernmental funding is the flexible consortia size. Now, intergovernmental funding ranges from very small bilateral calls, meaning you and one additional partner outside of your country, and can go up to medium or even larger size consortia. That gives you a lot of control over the project and the overall budget of your intended project at the end of the day. If you want to do a self-contained project with just one partner, that's an option. Go for the right track, and we'll review some right tracks for that. Conversely, excuse me, if you want to go for a more ambitious, larger scale project with a much more significant budget, there are avenues which are supported by intergovernmental funding that allow for that. Now we save the best part for last, as you can see here, number 4 here. Success rates for intergov calls are on average significantly higher than EU calls such as Horizon Europe calls and also EIC calls such as Accelerator and Pathfinder. On average, the success rate for intergovernmental calls is 25% upwards. If you have some experience with non-dilutive funding or intergovernmental funding, you will have realized that 25% is actually quite high for such type of funding. So our philosophy at Argentum is to always go for accessible calls, such as intergovernmental funding, alongside more competitive calls, which have higher budgets, such as Horizon calls or EIC calls. Basically, make the most out of everything that's available for you. And we're going to look later at some more examples of success rates. I've seen, by the way, that there were a couple of questions. So as I mentioned earlier, maybe some of you weren't available at that part. Towards the end of the webinar, our team will open a poll for Q&A, and we will be glad to get back to you after the webinar with follow-ups. So let's talk a bit about opportunities and challenges of intergovernmental funding. Our 3 rules here are to A, plan ahead, B, make the most out of your network, and C, think global, and we're going to have a look at all of these. Now, plan ahead is the most straightforward recommendation we can give here. There are multiple intergovernmental funding opportunities in a given year. Some have recurrent deadlines within a specific year, and some, meaning they have 2-3 deadlines per year, and some are annually recurrent. Now, what you want to do is not to exhaust one source of funding. At the end of the day, for most of you, you will have the same or quite similar funding sources for various intergovernmental funding opportunities. That means that your funding agency, national funding agency, or Ministry of Education or Science will be funding different intergovernmental calls. So it's important not to exhaust that source of funding. It won't be reasonable or even feasible to apply months after months to different intergovernmental calls which are funded by the same agency, unless you can show that agency that you will be doing vastly different R&D activities in those calls. Hence our recommendation, plan ahead. The calls are published in advance. At Argentum, we are quite good at anticipating when each call is going to open, and we provide our clients with estimated deadlines even before those are confirmed. And it's important to plan to maximize your ability to go for the calls that are most relevant for you at a specific time. If you know that you want to go, let's say, Q4 2025 for a bilateral call with a partner, let's say in Western Europe, or if you are based in Eastern Europe with a partner in your region, plan ahead. That way you can use the months in between to go for different calls, be those bilateral, intergovernmental, or cross-EU calls. This leads us to the second point, make the most out of your network. Now, for intergovernmental calls, natural partners are always encouraged to collaborate. That means that if you, let's say, are an SME based in the Netherlands and you have partners across the border in Belgium, maybe in Flanders, that could be a good policy to bring them on board for a bilateral project. However, let's say we take a different example. You are a relatively new SME based in Spain and you don't have natural partners. So don't be discouraged. A lot of the intergovernmental calls, especially those via EUREKA, but not only, have partnering platforms which allow you, or brokerage tools, which allow you to meet and reach out to relevant partners. Now, you don't only have to use those partnering platforms or brokerage tools. You can also use other services. Argentum, for instance, we have our own ecosystem, Argentum Consortia Link, ACL, which allows us, especially me as a strategist, to match my clients with respective partners, be those SMEs, large industry, or academia. Now, the last point here is think global. Intergovernmental calls, those based in Europe, but not only, are becoming more and more international. Now, that means that if you are based in Europe or in a Horizon Europe associated country, you have, via intergovernmental funding, more and more tools to branch out of Europe and to reach new markets and new partners. So make sure if you are, if you do intend to branch out of Europe, and we'll look at examples of which countries could be relevant, make sure that you allocate enough time in order to secure non-European or non-EU partners. If those are in North America, Canada, or in Asia, such as South Korea, it may take longer to secure such partnerships. So that brings us full cycle to the first point on this slide: plan ahead and make the most out of your network and existing and anticipated timelines. Moving on, just a quick word about how I, as a strategist, and my fellow strategists work in order to achieve these goals. So Argentum's multi-submission strategy is based on a first linear process and then a circular process, aimed at one point maximizing your ability to go for diverse funding opportunities. I'm not going to go through all the stages here. I'm going to focus more on the latter stages, 4 and 5. Once we start working actively with clients, my goal as a strategist and the strategy department goal as a whole is to ensure that our clients are always working on at least one active proposal and always planning towards the proposal after, if and when possible, to work on simultaneous proposals. That brings us to the points we just spoke about: planning ahead, making the most out of the existing and new partnerships that we can form, and if and when possible, thinking outside of Europe in order to reach new funding opportunities and new potential markets. Now, moving on, we're going to look at examples of specific intergovernmental calls. Some will be more relevant to specific attendees here, and some have larger appeal cross-European, whether EU or non-EU based companies. Now, the first one we're going to look at is Eurostars. Eurostars might be readily familiar to most of you, and that's for good reason. It is the flagship program of EUREKA, a intergovernmental or international organization, an umbrella organization, been around for 40 years or so. Now, EUREKA has several branches and clusters. We'll look at some a bit later. Eurostars, again, is the flagship program, and it is unique in the sense that it is A, completely bottom-up, open to any sector, B, specifically minded towards SME partnerships and collaboration, and C is, it's not listed here, but it's interesting to know, is co-funded by the EU. So even if you are not from an EU country or region, you can benefit from Eurostar's highest success rate, which is in part, originates in part because of the EU co-funding mechanism. Now, Eurostars, there are currently about 45 countries that participate in Eurostars, including several non-European countries. Such include Canada, Singapore, South Korea, South Africa, and other countries. Also, European but non-EU countries are permanent Eurostars members, such as UK, Switzerland, and other European countries. Now, any two partners from two different EUREKA Eurostars countries are eligible to join, but you need to check all eligibility boxes. And this is a bit of a different topic here, which I won't go into detail, but I'll just say intergovernmental funding is very accessible when it comes to the success rates. However, there are a lot of eligibility checks along the way. My strongest recommendation as a strategist is to make sure before you start any application that your entity, your company, checks all the eligibility boxes, and not just you, also your partner, because all of these are effectively bilateral plus partnerships. Do you have active R&D in your country? Do you have the number of full-time employees if your national funding agency requires that? Is your budget allocation according to the guidelines? All of these are questions, and many others are questions that you should answer well before you start working on the project, on the proposal, And actually, that's what I, as a strategist, do with my clients well before we kick off a proposal preparation. And I've actually taken the next slide to show you how we advise to prepare specifically for a Eurostars call, because this is sort of a template for intergovernmental calls, because once again, it is completely bottom up and readily accessible. So I've given a generic timeline here, which I think nonetheless is quite useful. And what we've advised here is broken into 4 different time spaces. So 4 months before the deadline, you should decide to target a call, such as Eurostars, and have an internal high-level discussion about the project concept. Make sure that your project aligns with the call in question, and then you can move on to the next stage. 3 months before the deadline, select your partner, and crucial stage, run 4 eligibility checks for all your partners. Of course, at Argentum, your strategist will do those eligibility checks for you. Next, check the call templates. Templates change, and you want to ensure that you're going to work on the current template. Also, it allows you to ensure that there are no surprises in the templates. Maybe there are documents that you didn't expect. Maybe you realize that the technology readiness level, the TRL of the project, is higher or lower than you expected. Make the adjustments. 2 months before the deadline, kick off the proposal preparation with the partner or partners. Now, we also strongly recommend, and most funding agencies recommend this as well, to hold intro calls with your national funding agency. Some request this specifically, some will actually only want a short email. Explain to them, it can be a 1-pager, it can be just a verbal explanation, what's the rationale of the proposed project, how you're going to achieve that. They might want to know you a bit better, to speak maybe about your financial terms, and leading on to the next step, which is a week before the deadline, we recommend not to submit a proposal last minute, but rather complete the budgets, do a last polish on the proposal draft, and aim to submit 48 hours before the deadline. Now, strong recommendation here from us, diversify your grant portfolio. We've spoken here about today's topic is intergovernmental funding, but again, our vision is long-term multiple submission strategy. It's great to go for intergovernmental funding whilst you are working on such a proposal, let's say Eurostars. Don't neglect other forms of funding. Plan ahead, make sure that you are targeting EU funding or funding other types of funding such as prizes and competitions. All will contribute to a well-rounded grant portfolio, which will allow you to maximize your funding capabilities. Moving on, let's look at other EUREKA calls, intergovernmental calls, outside of Eurostars, which isn't the only call. Now, we've given here just examples of 4 upcoming calls. Most of these are recurrent, as we put in our tips, and all are just examples. The other EUREKA calls, these are just the ones that are open now or expected shortly. We'll start with Global Stars. This is a unique mechanism within EUREKA that allows several times a year, 3-4 times a year actually, for non-EUREKA partners to have a call with designated EUREKA members. Now, in April, it's maybe too close, but it's a good idea to plan ahead for the next Global Stars. There's an interesting Global Stars call with Uruguay and select EUREKA members. We can expect for later 2025 Global Stars calls with Japan and Brazil. Those are annual calls that are recurrent. Now, moving on, let's look at the right side at Networks Projects Canada. Canada is very interesting in the fact that it is now a fully associated country of Horizon Europe. So utilizing Canadian-based partnerships for other projects such as Horizon Europe projects is most advisable. Canada has made very significant strides in increasing its R&D activities and bilateral projects with European ecosystem. And this is evident especially via the Networks Project of EUREKA, which is a recurrent call twice a year that allows any EUREKA member, not just Europeans, to engage a bilateral call with Canada, providing that your respective funding agencies greenlights that proposal. Now, if you are based in Austria, you will be glad to know that Austria has a pre-allocated budget for the upcoming call. Now, regardless of that, you should know that there's a somewhat hidden option within EUREKA that's just called Networks Projects that allows any two partners from any two EUREKA member states to submit a suggestion for a EUREKA Networks project. Let's say you are based in Germany and there's no relevant open call for you, and you have partners in France. You can suggest to EUREKA a network project between Germany and France. It doesn't mean that it will be greenlit, but you have the option to do so. And if the project proposal is enticing to your respective funding agencies, then it should have a good opportunity of moving forwards. Now, we'll close this slide at the bottom half looking at two of the EUREKA clusters, which, like all EUREKA funding opportunities, are intergovernmental funding. So we took two separate examples of upcoming opportunities. The one on the left, excuse me. Thank you. The one on the left is EUROGEA 2030. This is EUREKA's Clean Tech and Decarbonization cluster. I myself am a sustainability strategist at Argentum Consultants. I've been working almost exclusively with sustainability-related clients over the last 3 years. So EUROGEA is a cluster that I very often recommend to my clients. Now, EUROGEA has 24 countries currently participating, most EU countries and several non-EU countries. Unlike a lot of other clusters within EUREKA, EUROGEA effectively requires a very small consortium. 2-3 partners are enough. It's a two-stage call, and any cutoff date throughout the year, typically DAL3, can be first or second stage, depending if you've already submitted the short proposal. Now, the other side, we've got a very different call, Celtic Next. Celtic is EUREKA's smart communication cluster, and even if you are not a communication company per se, you will be interested to know that Celtic Next has a wide range of topics, ranging from e-health all the way to fintech. So within Celtic, there are 25 participating countries, again, most EU and several non-EU countries, including Canada, including some East Asian countries, and 2 annual cutoff dates, April and October. So again, always plan ahead. If you are too close to one deadline, don't be discouraged. Always plan for the next available deadline and plan for your consortia. Now, another word before we move on, both on EUROGEA and EUREKA and Celtic Next, but generally about EUREKA. For these two options, EUROGEA and Celtic Next, EUREKA offers brokerage tools or partnering platforms. These are great in order to meet new partners. And again, you can do that either via these partners, or you can engage Argentum and use our ecosystem, or allow us to use it for you and engage via us, potential partners. Now, we've spoken about EUREKA, we've spoken about Eurostars, but those are not the only options for intergovernmental funding. Sorry, I seem to have lost the sharing. Please bear with me. Sorry about the short difficulty. I'll just reshare in a moment. Okay. And we're back to sharing. Apologize about that. Okay. So back to our slide about additional funding opportunities. And as I was saying, EUREKA and Eurostars are not the only funding opportunities. A lesser known opportunity is called IRA SME, which admittedly is relevant to fewer applicants, but nonetheless, we wanted to include it here today because if you are from an eligible country, which are listed here, including Austria, Belgium, Czechia, Germany, Luxembourg, and Turkey, so you should very much take IRA SME into account. We at Argentum jokingly call this mini Eurostars, since it's also bottom up, has deadlines almost the same time as Eurostars and has the same requirements. However, IRSME is also much less known, and as we can see, the next slide, IRSME has significantly higher chances of success. Now, Eurostars in itself has very nice chances of success, 29 chances success rate 29% success rate is the official success rate. Argentum success rate is much higher than that. With IRSME, the success rate varies between 35% to 50%, so on average about 40 or 40 plus percent, which is very high actually for non-dilutive or intergovernmental funding. And budgets are very much similar, if maybe a little lower than Eurostars. So if you are from an eligible country, make the most out of what's available for you and prioritize. If you have two partners, if you and one of your partners are from RSME eligible countries, definitely prioritize this call and aim to go for Eurostars or one of the other EUREKA intergovernmental calls with partners that are non-RSME eligible, once again, maximizing your opportunities to go for diverse calls. Now, we want to have a quick look at other expected calls. And just to give you an example, we have confirmed and expected calls. The confirmed calls, the expected calls include UK and Germany and UK, Canada, both for late 2025. Additional global stars calls for Japan and Brazil, and the ITEA cluster of EUREKA, which is the software development cluster for November 25. I apologize, but there seemed to be a missing section of this slide, which we will correct before sending out this presentation. So I'll just add that there are several confirmed calls, including a Spain and Turkey call, including additional calls between Canada and select partners, and Israel Czechia call for July. So all in all, there are always opening or already open intergovernmental funding opportunities. So you can always have either a project that you can immediately engage in or a project that you can look forward towards within the next given 6 months or so. Intergovernmental funding opportunities are stable, recurrent, and with relatively high success rates, all of which, at the end of the day, means that you should definitely focus on those when planning ahead for your funding opportunities and grant needs. Oops, now the confirmed slides came, so it was my mistake, but here it is. Apologies about that. Now, before we close, just a quick summary. When we look at intergovernmental funding, remember, there's a variety of calls, a lot of deadlines, some are recurrent. It might be confusing, it might be even a bit overwhelming. However, pick the ones that are most suited for your needs and ensure that your grant portfolio includes at least one intergovernmental funding opportunity a year or until you finish one project, because once you win national funding or intergovernmental funding, that makes you more appealing for other funding agencies, including the EU as a whole. So intergovernmental funding is a stepping stone into EU funding. Now, target calls well in advance. The partnerships take time to form, especially if we're talking about non-European partnerships. So make the most out of the deadlines and of your networks or the additional partners that you can reach via Argentum or other means. Now, branch out of Europe if and when you can, with additional partners that will open new markets and new opportunities for you. And the last recommendation we have here is that you should adopt a multi-approach, meaning the more applications you do, the higher your overall chances of success. So target intergovernmental funding and simultaneously target EU funding to maximize your overall results. And as we can see here, a strong recommendation by my cat, don't wait, start planning today. There will always be another deadline, but why waste an opportunity if you can go for a call already today? Now, before we close, just another slide or two about Argentum, about our multiple submission strategy. Overall, I'll not go for stuff that we already said here, but what we aim to do is to maximize your ability to participate in different grant applications and thereby accelerate your chances of success. We want you to apply to various calls. We want to minimize your time investment, and we want you to seize immediate opportunities, but also plan ahead. At Argentum, we are currently familiar with around 300 different funding opportunities. Not all will be relevant for all types of clients, but you will have a vast array of relevant opportunities. We work on all funding mechanisms, European, bilateral, national fundings. We support single applications and consortia-based applications. And that brings us to the close of today's webinar. So I thank you all very much for your time. Apologies for the short delay while we had a technical issue. And once again, if you do have questions, the poll is open now. You can send the questions. Our team will be glad to get back to you. So thank you all very much again. Been a pleasure. Have a good day.